Okay, I'm Dr. Cott, Director of Mech again. This is the second of the series on microscopy. It's a series that we're calling Smart Microscopy. So we're using smart microscopes, and we're also teaching smart labeling and using the smart labels for various things, to include videos on how to use equipment, to include transmission of information, such as the information on the slide. So last week we did a video on large microscopes. When I say large, they're not really large, they're just more professional, and they're heavier. They're about 16 pounds. These are the smaller ones now, so they're more adaptable to carrying to school. So this microscope here, you see, is only about 6 pounds. So they have most of the power of the big scopes, but they probably will not do as much as the big scope. So in other words, the power-wise, they will probably go up from nothing to maybe 1,000. But when you try to push them above 1,000 magnification, it's not going to be as good, because the optics are just cheaper and smaller. So, but that telescope only costs less than $300. Comes in a nice case that's small, compatible with a woman being able to carry it to a college class. So when it's in the case, it's about the size of a woman's purse and maybe about the same weight. So as a telescope, it comes complete. Everything comes complete, and you can see here, compared with what we talked about last week, you've got your oculars and you've got the ocular rotating. One thing that, generally speaking, is missing on the cheaper ones down here, if you look, is a condenser. If you look at last week's video, you'll find there's a condenser there that condenses the light, so it gives you a lot more control over your lighting. This does. And it is triocular, which is nice. I would not buy any that are not triocular. And it actually comes with a very cheap little camera. You want to put that back in? That comes with it. So it comes as a package with a nice little case, the camera itself, and the camera, I'm trying to think, it's a USB, and I believe this runs on USB too, but we couldn't find the adapter. So I got it, I think, because we wanted to use it portable outside doing water quality testing. So anyway, this is a smart microscope. We went over all the parts of it last week, and they're more or less the same. Here's your oculars, okay, and here's your objectives, here's your stage, and as I said, the condenser is missing. And then you can control the light source on. One thing you have here, in the world of microscopy, there were two types of microscopes in the past. A microscope, and then those that we call the stereo microscope for gross objects. So if you wanted to look at an insect, not just parts of it or a leg of it or whatever, but the insect itself or something big, you would use what we call gross it, and therefore you need a light. So those microscopes were usually not, they did not have light coming through like this. They just had a stage you put your device on. So these actually have a light that come down to shine on, so you can do stereo microscopy, which is kind of a misnomer, because basically the better word for it is gross microscopy. And that's kind of been a misnomer too, because it's not really micro at that point, so it's gross. So there are different words for it. That's what surgeons and doctors use to do basically eye surgery, ear surgery, and so on for microsurgery, is that type of stereo microscope. So now we'll move on to Haley. Okay, so this is another one of the lower priced, fairly good microscope. This is made by one of the US companies, Celestron, that's been around for a long time in the field of astronomy. So they actually make some microscopes too, and this microscope, again, is in the range of $200 to $400. It will do most of what This scope will do too, plus you'll see different. This scope, we went over the USB. That one has got a digital LCD. So you can also push off from HMDI to a telescope, to a computer and so on. But you can also buy microscopes that have that thing built into it. So what you see here, what she's got on the screen is, Haley, tell them what power you're using. And remember, the mathematics of power is what is the lens, 10, 20, 2, whatever, times the objective. And what is the objective? If it's 10, 40, 80, 1,000. So if it's 10 times 4, it's 400 power. So
it's 40
what the power you're using?
40 times.
Louder, please.
40 times.
Okay. So you can see there, if you can see it at all, I don't know if he's picking it up with the camera, but anyway, what we've got there is slides, and these slides are bought from Carolina Biological. So they make a lot of good biological teaching systems, which we'll get into more in the future. This one happens to be a slide on human blood. So we'll be teaching in the book that we're writing. We'll have a chapter on a drop of water. That's common in biology and even elementary school, middle school, as a teaching. What is in a drop of water, a drop of rainwater, or a drop of pond water? So what I've added to that, because I'm very more interested in the human aspect of this as a retired doctor, is blood. So we've added to this microscopic world of teaching a drop of blood. So a drop of blood, what we're going to go over is the different kind of cells. So what you see there mostly is the red blood cells. So there's hundreds of them, if not thousands, if not millions of them. The blood cells carries chemistry around, carries the oxygen around to all the cells. You won't see them under that power. You might have to go to 1,000 with an oil immersion lens to see them well, to do what we call a differential count. So girls, look at this here, if you can see it. These are blood cells, white blood cells. So in the white blood cell world, but they're bigger. Okay. And we're going through a little bit on stains. The most common colors in our world is red and blue. Therefore, in the field of microscopy, they have picked out red and blue. That's the two ends of the electromagnetic spectrum, of the visible spectrum. So these are white blood cells, and you can see what we call granulated ones, which have a nucleus that's granulated. So you count those. And you need to know how many there are, and if that's very, very high, then more than likely the patient has a infection, such as appendicitis. Then you have in the lymphocytes, the other kind of cells, and monocytes, which we're not going to go through a lot of that. It's mostly the granulocytes we're going to start with. And we'll skip that one, and here I'll show it to the girls so they know what they're seeing. Girls, this is what you're going to be seeing under a microscope now. You're going to see white blood cells that are like this, but you'll be seeing hundreds of little ones that what you see there. I see probably 200 right from here on that one screen. And you may see, I don't know if you can pick them out or not, but if you want to raise the power, you can raise the power up to 800. I think one more flip of the screen and you might be able to see some white blood cells. That slide that you got came from Carolina Bacteriological, and it's what we call an eosinophil. So eosinophil cells, and basophils. So, boy. The red ones are eosinophil. Eosinophil is red. E-O-S-I-N, and then fill. Basophils are bluish. That means you have dye. So we use what we call hematoxylin, eosin hematoxylin dye for these. And we've got this slide here to start them off because we're used to seeing red. Stoplights are red, all kind of cars are red, my truck is red. So we happen to kind of like red. So the stain is red for these, so therefore the eosinophils stain red. And if you count lots of eosinophils there, then that tells the doctor that more than likely you have an allergy to something. So I come from the north, where you have an allergy to hay fever, we call it, in the September, August time frame, the end of August, September, October. Hay fever, where your nose runs and your ears, your anything that runs. So you start wiping your nose a lot and so on. So basically, that's an allergy. So they give you antihistamines. And antihistamine dries up these cells in your body that's producing that. So if your count goes up, when you're doing a differential count, you count, let's say, 100 cells. So you might have 4 basophils, let's say, and 10 eosinophils, and then the rest would be some kind of granulocyte. So if you see the basophil count goes up, that's another type of process, which we're not going to talk about today. We're only going to talk about the red, the eosinophils, so these young ladies learn that word. Eosinophil, hematoxylin, eo is red stain, okay. Hematoxylin is the blue stain, okay. So we're going to zero in on the red and the red blood cells on the screen there. And as a general rule, if you're doing a blood count, you will probably have about, I'm guessing now, I'm not going to be exact, but it's going to be close. You'll have like 1 to 200 red blood cells to each white blood cell. So you might have 200 red blood cells, so that count's going to be extremely high. Therefore, if you're going to use this slide, which we'll talk about maybe next week or a week after that, to do calculations on how many cells are on that screen, you need to know how many cells there are there. Therefore, you have to dilute it down a lot more to be able to see them. So if you're going to count red blood cells, you'll use a little pipette that dilutes down maybe 1 to 200 times. For white blood cells, which we'll talk about that in the counting chamber, it would be 1 in 20. So you do have to know there's a big difference between the red blood cell and the white blood cell. And the red blood cells are small, and they're red because of the hemoglobin that carries the oxygen. Therefore, if you don't have enough oxygen in your body, you're going to turn blue. So some babies are born with what we call blue baby. That means they have a hole in their heart, and the oxygen is not getting to oxygenate the blood. It's coming back as with the CO2 in it, and it's not picking up oxygen it should, and therefore the baby's skin is blue. So they need heart surgery very quickly. So the other thing, girls, you have to look at is that screen. When I was working in a lab in medical school, in a hospital lab for 7 years, this is the way we did it, okay? So chemistry has changed a lot. It's the same as astronomy has and microscopy. So at that point in time, instead of using a drop of blood, you used a pipette called a, can't think of the name now, but it's like the size of a toothpick. So you would need not a drop, so it's easier to get blood from people if you're going to take less than a drop. Okay, it's called microchemistry. So basically at that point we went over the change from the old way of chemistry of using a whole test tube of blood to get one drop out of it that you really needed on the slide. Okay, and we did the same in chemistry. So at that point we started putting in what now we call artificial intelligence. We sent a beam through there. It wasn't a microscope anymore. It was called a culture counter. So all those cells now are counted by an instrument. Put the slide in and then push a button and it will come up with the white blood cells. But if you're still going to go camping and go various areas where you don't have that high quality medicine to the developing countries, they will still be doing this kind of a medicine. So in my research for NASA, for example, we did a research project with papgo Indians on Arizona on the border between Mexico and USA. And they're somewhat like the Indians in Panama, Kuna Indians. They didn't accept Panama, and these people didn't know if they were Mexican or American. So they had a different standard of care. So the testing for NASA, for moon health and International Space Station health, would take a microscope like this with a camera on it, take that slide, and I would send that by microwave to Phoenix or Tucson. Then the pathologist in Phoenix or Tucson would look at it and he would send a diagnosis back. So he'd say, okay, they've got too many eosinophiles, therefore they probably have an allergy to something, and therefore put them on an antihistamine drug. If you saw too many white blood cells, granulocytes very high, he would say, we need to get an helicopter to you people in a hurry. We need to take that appendix out. So they'd get a helicopter down, take that patient, send them up to Phoenix or whatever. Now, many doctors are trained to do this through a belly button with a laparoscope, take out the appendix. My grandson just had his taken out this summer like that up in Fort Carson in Colorado Springs. So that was research that I did too. I did the first laparoscopy video in 1974 in Panama, and it set the stage for a whole world of this type of scope. So we'll be going into this after there. This is a microscope. From the microscope we'll go into the macroscope, and then from the macroscope we'll go into the operating microscope. So if you look on me here, my shirt, I went every year for about 7 years to California to teach doctors how to do microsurgery with that kind of scopes. Now it's done with what we call a robotic scope. So back then it was a operating scope, the same as eye doctors use and ENT doctors and so on. And we actually practiced in California in a vet lab there, and we taught doctors how to do this microsurgery when they were learning how to do microsurgery in the field of OBGYN. So anyway, that completes today's video. As I said, this is video number 3, and this is for chapter 1 in our book on smart microscopy. So the next thing we'll work on are slides, how to work with smart slides. So thank you all for watching.